Welcome to The World with me, Yalda Hakim. First this evening, I just want to begin by focusing on a story closer to home. A Metropolitan Police firearms officer charged with murdering Chris Kaba has been found not guilty. Martin Blake fatally shot the 24-year-old in southeast London in September 2022 after the Audi he was driving was pursued in connection with the shooting the previous evening. Our crime correspondent Martin Brunt has the story.
Onto New Park Road, continuing southbound, then past what's your ETA?
30 seconds.
Through South London, a convoy of police cars followed the suspect's Audi Q8. It had been linked to a shooting the night before.
Standing by for strikes, stand by, stand by.
When it turned into a side street, police launched a plan to stop it and remove the driver.
Onto Coastal Gardens. Do it here, it's in line. Oh, police! Show me your hand!
Boxed in, surrounded by armed police, the driver, Chris Kaba, 24, and a father-to-be.
Show me your hands!
He rammed the Audi forwards.
Stop the car!
Officers' body-worn cameras and dash-cam footage caught the speed, the noise and the drama of what was happening.
Watch yourself.
Police smashed two of the car's windows.
Mind them, he's going to try and go.
The Audi rammed backwards into a police car. As it stopped, an officer fired one shot. The jury was shown a graphics version of the movement of the firearms officers. Martin Blake is the yellow dot. He ends up in front of the suspect's car from where he takes the fatal shot. The officer said he feared the car would hit and kill one of his colleagues. His shot hit the driver in the forehead and killed him. The jury acquitted him of murder. Chris Kaba had no weapon on him. It wasn't his car. His family spoke of their deep sense of injustice. On the day after the shooting, they had said as much.
The reports are that it was a pursuit. Where was the pursuit? He was boxed in. The pursuit where? You know, and why did they shoot him in his vehicle with the windows up? I don't get it.
Police!
In London and elsewhere, campaigners looked for an explanation. 2 years later, Mr. Kaba's parents were at the Old Bailey to watch their son's killer in the dock. A rare thing, a firearms officer charged with murder. A court ban on his image, but not his name, Martin Blake, aged 40. In court, the prosecutor said the officer had no reason to fire his gun. He had given false statements and exaggerated the danger. Mr. Kaba said the prosecutor had ignored police shouts to stop, and that made the officer angry, frustrated and annoyed. The officer told the jury he felt none of that. He was filled with dread, he said, because the driver was trying to use his car to escape. He thought one of his colleagues was about to die, so he fired to incapacitate the driver and stop the car. After the verdict, the Met Commissioner called for better legal protection for firearms officers.
No police officer is above the law, but we have been clear that the system holding police to account is broken. I worry about the lack of support officers face for doing their best. But most of all, I worry for the public. The more we crush the spirit of good officers, the less they can fight crime.
Tony Long is one of 4 on-duty officers in recent times to be tried for murder or manslaughter. He shot dead a suspect in North London nearly 20 years ago. He was acquitted.
We ask those police officers to look after us. And so if we train them to use these varying degrees of force, ending up potentially with lethal force, then I think we should be not cutting them some slack, but we should have a better understanding. And you can't just automatically say, well, that police officer shot someone, and then go, well, charge him with murder.
The jury has delivered its verdict on the shooting of Chris Kaba, but the debate over the police use of lethal force will continue. Martin Brunt, Sky News, at the Old Bailey.
Well, let's go to the Middle East now. And it seems there just isn't a day that goes by without hearing the true horrors people in Gaza are living through. Schools, homes, hospitals, all places that should be safe. But it's clear that what might be considered out of harm's way in a conventional war setting is anything but in Gaza. The images here are of men, women and children being ushered out of the Strip's biggest refugee camp, Jabalia. Where are they going? We don't know. But what we do know is it shows the sheer number of people displaced from what was once a place of refuge. And whilst the suffering takes place, some of Benjamin Netanyahu's right-wing ultra-nationalist supporters are thinking of how they move in. Yes, live in Gaza. Until 2005, there were Israeli settlements across Gaza, mainly in the south, but the International Court of Justice found them to be illegal. Well, let's go straight to our Adam Parsons, who joins me now from Jerusalem. And Adam, you've been speaking to some of these settlers, today, but let's just talk about the last 24 hours, 48 hours in Gaza, because it has been an incredibly violent weekend.
Yeah, it really has, and a lot of that has focused on a place called Jabalia in northern Gaza, which has, according to one of the people we spoke to in Jabalia today, been attacked for 17 days in a row. There have been some dreadful attacks there, and also some extraordinary scenes, and those scenes that you've talked about, Yalda, of people being rounded up, I think are resonating well beyond the confines of either Israel or Gaza. What we understand has happened is that men have been separated from women and children. Exactly what is happening to those people subsequently is a matter of dispute. What Israel is saying is that effectively these people are being told they are in a very dangerous place, that Jabalia is a place that the Israel Defense Force is going through looking for Hamas terrorist infrastructure, and that all of these people have been told that it is unsafe, that they should leave, and that they are being guided to safety. There have been other reports coming out of Jabalia of people talking of maltreatment, particularly focused upon the men who've been rounded up. And while this has been going on, the attacks on Jabalia have been incessant. Another one today, airstrikes that hit a number of buildings, including a school that was being used as a shelter, and images that have come out of that of injuries, very serious injuries, and clearly fatalities as well. So another pretty grim day across Gaza, but I think really focused on this one town, which not so long ago was a substantial place, a centre of the fruit trade, and is now being absolutely focused upon by Israel and subject to repeated and very hefty attacks.
Yeah, I mean, the international community, namely the United States and other Western allies, have expressed concern about aid not reaching the north for a number of weeks, certainly for the first half of October. So there is growing concern around famine. And of course, Adam, last week when we saw, the killing of Yahya Sinwar, there was a lot of chatter as well around whether this would lead to a different phase, that perhaps it would end the violence that we have seen in Gaza over the course of the last year. But these images clearly show that Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israelis, don't have an appetite for that at this point in time.
No, I think there was a kind of euphoric bounce after the death of Sinwar, and a feeling that this could be the catalyst. Why? Well, there were the optimists who said that Sinwar had been the block on any potential peace deal, and whoever replaced him would be more open to that. Now, I think the reality is far more complicated. Number one, Hamas remains dedicated to trying to achieve a victory, and whoever replaces Sinwar in charge, and it may be more than one person, we may not actually have that name released to us, is unlikely, I think, to suddenly turn into a peace-seeking reconciler. The other side is the uncompromising stance of the Israeli government. I mean, I think Benjamin Netanyahu is talking about absolute victory. I spoke to one of his Likud MPs today, who again talked about total victory and said that, in his opinion, would mean not just subjugating Hamas, but setting up settler communities in northern Gaza. So these things, Yalda, are absolute polar extremes. I think it is clear that Joe Biden would like to get a peace settlement before the presidential election. I think here in Israel, it is widely assumed that Benjamin Netanyahu is back in the cause of Donald Trump and is probably resistant to any peace deal before that presidential election happens. And as you said, this is played out against a geopolitical background where the European Union is pushing hard for a deal. And yet also the United Nations is warning of disease and of famine and is saying that it is unacceptable that they cannot get their aid into the country, particularly in the north of the country. The problem, as we have said more than once before, is that the UN may say it is unacceptable, but the levers that they are able to pull are limited. And at the moment, Israel is making things difficult because Benjamin Netanyahu and his war cabinet are focused on this concept of a total victory. Antony Blinken is coming to Israel for further talks yet again. We know the Americans are focused on the idea of the day after. I think for Israel, it is a focus on winning, whatever that might
Yeah,
mean.
absolutely. I mean, what day after and total victory look like, it's still unclear. And of course, you have been speaking to some of those settler communities, and we will be showing your piece in a moment. But for now, Adam, thank you so much for bringing us up to date. Well, earlier, I spoke to a paediatrician who is working in Gaza with the NGO Children Not Numbers. I began by asking Dr. Mahmoud what he's seeing on the ground. Have a listen.
The situation is in the hospitals that I work is because I worked at more than one hospital. There is like incredible load of injured patients are coming in daily. And because, you know, many of hospitals here in Gaza are just are out of function at the full capacity. So there is lack of essential resuscitations and witnessing patients on the edge of death. Just, I mean, like patients are receiving aids on the ground and the risk of infections are so high, and there are some surgical procedures are done without anesthesia. So
it's tough. Yeah, I mean, you are a pediatrician. You deal with a lot of children. Just tell us about the challenges and the difficulties there.
Yeah, the injuries we're treating are severe. I mean, most of the cases are trauma related due to the airstrikes, tank missiles, collapsed buildings, includes the fractures, burns, shrapnel wounds, and severe head and spinal injuries. So, and also we are seeing a large numbers of amputations.
Just tell me, are you able to, with the limited resources that you have, able to perform to the best of your abilities? Because the things you're describing just sound absolutely horrific, and the images that we've been seeing coming out of Gaza have been just absolutely devastating.
Yeah, everything is like, as I mentioned, like the situation is dire and awful. I mean, like the injured people literally are on the ground. When they just like got bombed, they are on the ground. So there are no enough beds, no enough medications, no enough ambulances. So like the situation is really dire. So I can't imagine like seeing children are amputated in front of my eyes, and there is no like a bed for this child. Like normally there's like one bed for every patient, but nowadays like 3 children or 3 injured patients just like in the same bed.
And the situation we're seeing in the last few days in northern Gaza has escalated again.
Yeah, the situation in northern Gaza hospital is clearly, beyond imagination. To understand what is happening in a northern Gaza hospital now, most of the hospital in northern Gaza are out of just function at all. And I have my doctor friend there just told me that the Indonesian hospital there in northern Gaza is under severe siege and surrounded by tanks.
You are from Gaza. You've been working in these hospitals since the start of this war. You've been treating children. When you look at the situation in Gaza, what do you think will happen next? Are you hopeful that this conflict will end and that there will be some kind of hope for you and the Palestinian people there?
We need an immediate intervention from the international community, at least by starting by reopening the borders, because there's a lot of injured people, children that must be evacuated as soon as possible. So I hope that the whole world needs to act so we can here live normally and in peace.
Dr. Mahmoud, thank you very much for joining us here on the programme.
Thanks a lot.
That was Dr. Mahmoud speaking to us there from Gaza a little earlier. We've got some news that's been breaking in the last few minutes. About an hour ago, the IDF issued a warning to residents of southern suburbs of Beirut, saying that they were going to be conducting an operation because of concerns around a hospital. They accused one of the hospitals in the southern suburbs of having a Hezbollah cash bunker located beneath it, and the hospital denied this, but they did start to evacuate staff and those within the hospital. Well, in the last few minutes, we've been told news coming in from a senior security source in Lebanon. They've said that at least 3 people have been killed and tens of people have been injured in that Israeli strike on the southern suburbs of Beirut. So just news coming through in the last few minutes that at least 3 people have been killed and tens of people have been injured in that Israeli strike. Let's just show you these images over the skyline of Beirut, and you can see it's dark at the moment, but you can hear that sound of that explosion over Beirut skyline. And we understand this explosion took place in the southern suburbs of Beirut, which has been really battered in the last few weeks as a result of Israel's aerial campaign, where we have seen a majority of the bombardment taking place in those southern suburbs, where Israel has said that they have been trying to weed out Hezbollah's command center, as well as kill top commanders. But in the last hour, they asked for one of the hospitals to evacuate staff because they claimed that a Hezbollah cash bunker was located beneath the hospital. Now, the hospital's director told Reuters news agency that these allegations were simply allegations, not true, that they didn't have a Hezbollah cash bunker located beneath the hospital. But we're now learning that as a result of a series of explosions, at least 3 people have been killed, and we understand tens of people have been injured. That is according to a senior security source in Lebanon. Now, our correspondent Alex Rossi witnessed the aftermath of one of the Israeli attacks overnight in the Chia neighbourhood in southern Beirut. Just have a listen to his update.
Well, this is the site of one of the airstrikes from last night. You can see the force of the explosion has completely pancaked this building. Now, in the upper levels, you can see people's possessions. I'm seeing a kitchen cupboard, a washing machine, curtains. These were apartment buildings. It was an apartment building. People lived above it, but below was this financial institution affiliated to Hezbollah. which was the target of the Israeli attack. Now, the Israelis claim that it was used to finance Hezbollah, particularly their military wing, to pay their fighters and also buy their bombs and bullets. And that is why they decided to hit it. Now, the organization Al-Qad al-Hassan has accused Israel of bankruptcy. That's the financial organization, but has assured its customers that their funds are safe. The best way to describe it is it was kind of an Islamic lending house. But you can see here, have a look, the force of the explosion. Even the building opposite, the walls have been ripped out on people's homes. Up here, you can see flags. These are, I suppose the best way to describe them, they are important Shia symbols. The people there are political and clerical leaders. The man on the left is Musa al-Sadr, who is revered by both Hezbollah and the Amal movement as well. We are in a Shia neighborhood in southern Beirut, just above Dahia. That's the stronghold of Hezbollah. Now, on the other side of the road, we can't point the camera that way. We've been told by Hezbollah, who are here watching this site, there's a lot of paper which is linked to the financial institution, but we've been told we can't look at it and we can't film it. Now, in this building, there were no casualties at the time. The attacks took place at about 10 o'clock last night. We heard from the part of the city we were in sounds of explosions. We saw the skyline light up with orange and yellow from the blast. But Israel had issued evacuation warnings to these areas, about 12 hits in all, and people had left. Hundreds of people taking to the streets last night, joining, of course, more than 1 million people have been displaced by this conflict. But what this represents by targeting this financial arm of Hezbollah is an intensification of the violence. There had been hopes with the killing of Yahya Sinwar that you may see a pathway towards diplomacy. But at the moment, if anything, the fighting and the violence is intensifying, and this crisis is getting worse.
That's our Alex Rossi reporting there from Beirut about the ongoing impact of Israel's aerial bombardments. And of course, we broke the news in the last few minutes about concerns of a hospital that has been targeted. We understand, according to senior security sources, Israel had asked for the hospital to be evacuated. They said that they believed that a cash bunker of Hezbollah existed beneath the hospital. The hospital director has denied that, but we know now that, according to senior security sources, that 3 people have been killed. And we have been also speaking about the ongoing violence in Gaza. We spoke a little earlier to our Adam Parsons. This is his report.
From this field, you can see Gaza on the horizon, a shattered landscape. But these people would all like to go and live there. These are the settlers in waiting, keen to start a new life, to annex Gaza for Israel. But what of the Palestinians who live in Gaza now? Most we spoke to suggested they should be expelled, but some here were even more extreme.
I just think we need to kill them, every one of them, and that's it. And if not that, because the country will not let that happen, the government. Just the least we can do is just kick them out of our land, because this is our home, this is our land, and we deserve it.
Settling Gaza was once a fringe idea, but now it's suddenly mainstream. The National Security Minister was here, telling the crowd that it was the moral and correct solution.
The truth is that this is the most moral, the most correct solution, not under force.
But this, perhaps the biggest draw, a woman who spent 50 years urging people to seize land and settle in the West Bank. She told me Gaza could be occupied even while soldiers were still fighting. How do you imagine the war will end to let you live in Gaza?
While the war is continuing, we will fill the areas that were liberated with Jewish community.
Across the neighbouring field, a counter-protest. from people who see the mere idea of settling in Gaza as repellent, inflammatory, and worryingly popular.
It's no one's right and it's no one's duty, and what they're doing is illegal. What they're doing is A, illegal, B, it's going to cause incredible problems.
The people gathering here say it would be a privilege, a right, even a duty to settle in Gaza. We spoke to a couple with 3 young children who said they were excited at the prospect. But as we spoke, you could hear the thud of shelling. Gaza, which is just 2 miles in that direction, is under attack again. Israel's focus was once again trained on Jabalia in northern Gaza. Here, people have been rounded up, men separated from women and children. Israel says it is offering them safe passage, that hundreds have already gone. But as they were leaving, more airstrikes hit this cursed town. The people of Jabalia, like so many across Gaza, feel besieged and battered. And yet, just across the border, there are others who are desperate to move in. Adam Parsons, Sky News, near the Israel-Gaza border.
Let's cross to Moldova now, and a referendum there has narrowly, very narrowly, backed a path towards joining the EU. Moldova's president blamed the close results on external influences. She is, of course, talking about Russia. Well, yesterday's vote marked a critical juncture in the continuing struggle between Russia and the West for control over the former Soviet state. With all the votes now counted, yes stood at 50.46%, the no vote 49.54%. The yes votes in green were situated in the central part of the landlocked nation, whereas those against closer ties to Europe in purple can be seen predominantly in the north and southern regions. Our correspondent Siobhan Robbins has this report.
The morning after the night before in Moldova, and politics is playing high. I'm categorically against the European Union. Why do we need it? The European Union means war. Look at what's happening in Ukraine, says Dmitry. But before he's even finished talking to us, a fight breaks out behind. On one side, pro-Europe, on the other, against. Moldovans had been voting in an EU referendum marred by allegations of Russian meddling. A nail-biting count, which the yes camp won by a razor-thin majority. Claiming victory in a far calmer manner, the pro-European president, who warned foreign forces had tried to derail democracy.
It's normal to have people who have different views. What's not normal is to have a situation where criminal groups are bribing voters.
Maya Sandu didn't name Moscow, but police previously accused pro-Russian groups of spending millions of dollars trying to buy the vote and spread disinformation. The Kremlin's denied involvement, but first-time voter Magdalena is in no doubt. The voting process was clearly influenced by Russia. There was lots of attempts to bribe people, she says, adding she's worried the super close result could spark unrest. The EU says this vote was hit by unprecedented interference from Russia. But regardless, large pockets of people in the north and south voted against closer ties with Europe.
Is more than divided, it's very fragmented, because even if you analyze the vote yes or the vote no, you'll find many groups with different arguments why did it. So there are different groups, which is even more dangerous than just a simple polarization.
A vote that was meant to finally settle a question on Moldova's future has instead sparked uncertainty and confusion, creating division rather than unity. Moldova may be a step closer to the EU, but the path ahead is far from clear. Leaders must now heal the divisions inside the country and block interference from abroad. Siobhan Robbins, Sky News, Chisinau.
Well, let's talk more about just how close this was. I'm joined now by Adrian Balatul, Moldovan President Maya Sandu's Chief of Staff. Thank you very much for joining us here on the programme. I mean, when we say razor-thin majority, it was just so tight and so close.
Yes, but a win is a win, and more exercises of this kind across Europe were passed with a minimum votes, but it was still widely recognized both domestically and in the EU. So people clearly expressed the vote. It's a yes for the European path. We are fully committed on implementing our European agenda of Moldova 2030, European Moldova 2030, or preparing to join the EU by the 2030. It's a clear sign that indeed there is a lot of work on building consensus in the society, but including this referendum was an exercise of this kind, because beyond the result itself, the number of people who went to the poll, both at home and our citizens across the world in the diaspora, was impressive, and that confirms the legitimacy of this referendum and the magnitude of the decision taken by the people.
Yeah, I mean, you say a win is a win, but when we look at just how razor thin the majority was, I guess it goes back to your point about how much work needs to be done, because clearly Moldova is divided on the issue.
Look, we believe that more people expressed the vote in a very responsible manner. The police documented an effort of vote buying from criminal groups affiliated to Russia in an amount of up to 150,000 people, with an objective to raise and grow this number up to 300,000 people. So when we say about a legitimate, strong support for the EU in the current conditions, in the conditions that in the past 2 years, Moldova have been a subject of disinformation efforts, malign interference, criminal groups trying to interfere in the political life, economic crisis caused by the Russian aggression in Ukraine, all of this adding together and affecting, of course, people's or lives of Moldovans
and their opinions. I mean, that's and let's talk about that, because you know,
and still having passed the referendum and having a majority of the citizens saying yes, that is an important milestone for us. In the current conditions, very few nations across the world can say that they were free from malign interferences in the past years, and in many countries across the world that caused dramatic effects on democratic institutions and electoral processes. And even though that happened to Moldova this time, we prevailed. And
yeah, I mean, the Kremlin has come out and not surprisingly has said that they don't believe the election was free. You know, no surprises that they've said that. But how concerned are you now going forward about this continued influence and interference from the Russians?
It is clear for us that more serious, fast and decisive measures will have to be taken in our effort of justice reform, because although police documented the cases of electoral or voters buying or electoral interferences, many of those cases are stuck in the justice sector or in the prosecution phase. That sparks a lot of frustration among the citizens in the first place. And it's of course, it is clear for everyone that we need to win these elections. We need to mobilize the society on defending the democracy in the Republic of Moldova and defending our European path. And after that, reconsider and increase our efficiency on what's called Moldovan justice sector reform, and upheld it to the expectations in the first place that citizens have.
Let's talk about the presidential race, because the president now does face a second round in about 2 weeks' time. Her main competitor, pro-Russian, campaigner. How worried are you about this?
Look, we're talking about how much Moldova was affected by the Russian aggression of Ukraine, how much we were affected by an economic crisis caused by this, by fake news, disinformation, and so on. And even in these conditions, Madam President gained over 160,000 votes more than it has in the previous campaign in the first round. So for us, it's a moderately optimistic result. Of course, we are facing a number of candidates that were trying to undermine our efforts, but nevertheless, that's an optimistic outlook for us, and we'll be going forward, talking to the people, asking them to get out and vote. We are deeply concerned about the Russia's effort to buy votes again and to repeat the exercise of voters buying. But one thing that we did and we do every time we are winning through the vote, through convincing people that the way Madam President has been putting forward for Moldova citizens is a good way, and European integration is a way to go. So we'll be going out there asking for the people's votes, and we'll be going for the win.
Adrian Balatul, thank you for joining us here on the programme.
Thank you.
Okay, let's just remind you of our breaking news in the last half an hour or so. As we mentioned, we understand that 3 people have been killed in southern Beirut and tens of people have been left injured as a result of Israel's continued aerial bombardment campaign in the southern suburbs of Beirut. So let's just show you these images of Beirut at the moment. It's about 11:30 at night. You can hear the sound of explosions there. We understand that the target was a hospital, and the IDF issued a statement to the residents close to that hospital, as well as to staff within that hospital, to evacuate the hospital and the area, because they claimed that there was a Hezbollah cash bunker beneath the hospital. Now, the hospital's director has denied these allegations and has said this is not the case, but Israel has said that that was the reason they were looking to target the hospital. Now, we're not quite sure exactly where the deaths occurred, but according to senior security officials, we are told that 3 people have been killed and dozens of people have been injured as a result of the blasts that we saw and have heard in the last half an hour. So you're looking at these images. It's about 11:30 at night. We've been seeing a lot of these aerial bombardment campaigns continue over the course of the last few weeks since Israel began its campaign there across Lebanon, especially in the south of the country and in the southern suburbs of Beirut, where they have said that they are targeting top Hezbollah commanders as well as their command centers. This is also where they killed the leader of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, just a couple of weeks ago, and more than 1 million people have been displaced as a result of the ongoing bombardment that we've seen in parts of southern Lebanon. Well, as you can see, based on our count, there are just 2 weeks to go until America decides. The polls show a razor-tight race for the White House, and both Donald Trump and Kamala Harris have upped the ante on the campaign trail. Now, former President Trump, you can see him serving up fries in a McDonald's in Pennsylvania. He accused his competition of lying about once having worked for the fast food giant. The vice president, meanwhile, accused her opponent of demeaning the office of president while speaking at a campaign event in Georgia. Well, let's go straight to our James Matthews, who's been following all the twists and turns from Washington. And James, I mean, so many Americans I'm speaking to, when you ask them about their predictions, they say, do you have a quarter? Have you got a coin? Because it really does feel like you could flip it at this stage. It is that tight.
Yeah, absolute coin toss, Yalda. Kamala Harris, today she's on a tour of the key blue wall states, both candidates out in search of the undecided. Harris today been in the company of Liz Cheney, prominent Republican, daughter, of course, of the former Vice President Dick Cheney. The two of them have been sharing a stage in this relentless pursuit of the voters still to make up their minds. It is for Harris today, and in terms of the whole closing out of her campaign, a reach for the soft Republican vote. white college-educated voters, women in particular, who traditionally vote Republican, but who the Harris camp thinks want an alternative to Trump. Abortion was the headline subject matter on stage today. Donald Trump, for his part, he reverted to the more conventional campaigning style with events in North Carolina. It follows that weekend photo call with fries at a McDonald's. And as you said, Yalda, that was an exercise in throwing shade on Kamala Harris. He questions her claim that she worked at McDonald's when she was a student. So on both sides, it's the critical closing phase, critical because polls show minimal change and they remain tight. Our national tracker has them 2 points apart, and in the swing states, very much too close to call.
Yeah, very much so. James, I'm going to just keep you there because we're just going to bring in our next guest who joins us from Washington and who will be with us in Washington on the night of the election. Joining me now is Gerard Baker, editor-at-large for the Wall Street Journal. Thank you so much for joining us here on the programme. We'll be talking a lot on the night of the election, but just speaking to our correspondent there, James, about just how tight the race is right now.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly true, Yalda. All the polls certainly suggest that this is the tightest election we've seen after two very close elections the last two times. This one is actually, if anything, even tighter. National polls have Kamala Harris leading by a thin margin, and the key critical 7 swing states split pretty well right down the middle. It's as close as it could be. That said, talking to the campaigns, it's pretty obvious that in the last couple of weeks, there does seem to be a growing sense of confidence in the Trump campaign. Kamala Harris had a very strong summer when she, of course, first emerged as the Democratic candidate back in mid-July, and then she had a convention, and then she had a strong debate perform against Donald Trump. But she seems to have kind of stalled out there after that. Pollsters and people in the campaigns themselves that I've spoken to in the last week seem to, on both sides, seem to think that Trump, in those critical key swing states where the race will be decided, such as Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Trump maybe just now has a slight edge. She is having trouble remobilizing the coalition that voted for Joe Biden in 2020, particularly a lot of black voters. She'll win black voters overwhelmingly, but much larger numbers of them are saying they're going to vote for Donald Trump or not vote at all. Hispanics are going to vote in much larger numbers than they have in the past for Donald Trump, the Republican. So there's just a sense, I think, that in both campaigns, that as things stand with 2 weeks to go, Trump maybe in a very, very close race has the slight edge.
As you say, I mean, she really did have a lot of momentum behind her when Joe Biden stepped aside and she emerged. I mean, the number of volunteers, the kind of money that she's been able to raise. Have the pollsters been able to get a sense of why things have suddenly felt like they've stalled for her?
Yeah, I think she had. Look, she burst onto the scene, literally, right? Joe Biden was the nominee until 3 months ago, was going to be the candidate. And then, of course, he had that terrible debate performance, pulled out a couple of weeks after that. Middle of July, she suddenly became the candidate. It was a kind of, it was an amazing opportunity for her because people did want change. They wanted something new. Joe Biden was certainly not new, very, very old, in fact. Donald Trump is not new, either in terms of his age or the fact that he's been around in politics in the American political scene now for almost a decade. So there was the prospect of change and something new and something different and something, just a kind of an opportunity to turn the corner and turn the page. And she took advantage of that in that first month or so. The problem, I think, Yalda, is that she hasn't really been able to convince people what that newness will actually mean, what it will actually represent. She's new to the, now she'd be a fresh presidential figure, but she's not been very good at explaining where she stands on the issue. She's still hampered by the fact that many of the issues that confront the country right now, people are unhappy about the performance of the Biden administration, and she's obviously been a part of that. She has not been able to make herself sufficiently distant from Joe Biden and the Biden record, understandably, because she's been part of it, nor to give herself to really capitalize on that freshness that she seemed to represent a couple of months ago. And people are just reverting to, well, actually, what would it mean if she gets in? Is it going to be another 4 years of Joe Biden? What does she actually stand for? We liked what Donald Trump did when he was in office. So again, just at the margins, and it's very, very close, as you said right at the beginning, you could flip a coin, but just at the margin, it does feel as though Harris's momentum has stalled. Trump is closing quite strongly, and with 2 weeks to go, he probably does have the edge.
Yeah, I guess one of the things, that we've continued to hear, especially from the undecided, they're not quite sure who Kamala Harris is. I mean, I guess, you'd have that as someone who came into the race in August. But it's very clear to them, and people know who Donald Trump is and what he stands for. And I guess there isn't that level of clarity around Kamala Harris, and certainly not exactly what her policies are. She continues to say, I am not Joe Biden.
That's exactly right, Yalda. There is that doubt about her, about what she actually stands for. She did run for president, memorably in 2019, memorably because it was so awful. It ended so badly. She did so badly in the Democratic primary that she pulled out before a single vote was cast. But in that election 5 years ago, she took a very, very strong left-wing position on pretty well everything from immigration to the economy to healthcare to guns, all positions that, might go down very well in Britain, but don't go down very well the kind of mainstream of American politics, and she lost back there to Joe Biden. So she's kind of abandoned all those positions and hasn't really given a clear indication of what she's replaced them with. And the other thing I would say, Yalda, talking to a very senior Democrat last week, the other problem that she's had in the last week or two, she's given a lot of these interviews up until last week to relatively kind of friendly interviews, appearing on late night talk shows, appearing on podcasts about, dating and things like this. And it's been very kind of soft focus, gentle, personality, biography based. Their internal polling, the Democrats, is telling them that people don't regard her as tough. They've seen a lot of this kind of flimsy sort of, flim-flam that she's been doing, and that doesn't look like the kind of toughness they want to see from a president. So in the last week, she's changed tack a bit. She started to give tougher interviews. She appeared on Fox News. She went right into the lion's den last week and appeared on Fox News. She's talked about her doing the Joe Rogan podcast possibly this week or some other. So she's got to try and demonstrate not only that she stands for something and that she really does represent something new and fresh, but also that she's got the kind of fundamental toughness to be president. Remember, and I think to some extent, you can't rule out completely the issue of her gender. Women do often, when they succeed in politics, have to kind of succeed in a way by showing that they're even tougher than the men that they're running against. Maybe just because there's kind of, residual, stereotypes that men particularly have in their mind. She's got to show her toughness in the next 2 weeks because she's failing to do that so far.
Well, Gerard, I'm really looking forward to speaking to you on election night and, really breaking down a lot of these issues. Thank you so much for joining us here on the programme.
Thanks for having me.
Let's go back to our James Matthews, who's been standing by. And James, you can hear there all of those issues that continue to be raised around Kamala Harris and what we know about her. But certainly people know where Donald Trump stands on these things. And we're seeing a lot of his backers, the likes of Elon Musk, coming out and really campaigning in a very strong way for him.
Yeah, Harris has got it tough, and she's got it tougher because Elon Musk is throwing his weight and his money around in support of Donald Trump. It is the big election giveaway that he's undertaking, given $1 million every day, he says. This is a lottery that applies in the swing states. He's saying to voters, you register, I'll give you $100, enlist somebody else to sign a pro-US Constitution petition, and I'll give you another $100. For somebody every day, one lucky randomly selected individual, they are given $1 million. The proof is in the footage we can show you now on stage, complete with big lottery check.
So every day between now and the election, we'll be awarding $1 million, starting tonight. All right. So, tonight's person is John Dreyer.
And James, a lot of questions about whether this is legal, not legal, a lot of banter around this issue.
Yeah, banter, very serious accusations on the other side of politics. It does raise legal questions. It is illegal to pay or offer payment for voting or for registering to vote. And Trump's opponents and many lawyers are saying this cash giveaway crosses the line. Democrats in particular are weighing into it because they like and they see the whiff of illegality, and any hint of a fracture in the Trump-Musk power axis clearly works for them.
James, thank you so much for bringing us up to date there. Now, before we go, I just wanted to share this with you. Have a look.
This nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom.
A date which will live in infamy.
A short time ago, an American airplane dropped one bomb.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
Well, I'm not a crook.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Today, our very freedom came under attack.
We are the change that we seek.
It's been the honor of my life to serve as your president. I love my country more.
We're going to make America great again.
While I may be the first woman in this office, I will not be the last.
There have been 46 presidents of the United States. Who will be next in the White House? Get the full story first on Sky News.
Well, the President's head sculptures in Williamsburg, Virginia, are a unique monument to some of those who've previously held the role. Taken from an outdoor museum that went bankrupt over a decade ago, they now sit on a private property that doubles as a recycling plant. Well, Mark Jakubowski, director of the Bluffs of Kiskiak project, which aims to build a museum to house the statues, joins me now. Thank you so much for joining us here on the programme. Just tell us, because these it's quite extraordinary sculptures and statues, what sort of the thinking around them were?
They were initially sculpted by a sculptor in Houston, Texas, and they were put on a property very near Busch Gardens, not very far from where they're sitting right now. The sculptures' prior owners lost, as you had indicated, the financing and the lease on the lot. So he hired Mr. Howard Hankins, who owns the property that they're sitting on now, to remove the sculptures, which he did. And instead of disposing of them, he saved them on his property because he thought they were very unique, 16 to 18 foot sculptures of 42 of our presidents. So these have been there. As you can see, they're in a bit of disarray and a bit of disrepair. However, the majority of them are in great condition. We intend to do some restoration to the majority of them, and they will be placed in a planned museum, the President's Walk Museum, in the Bluffs of Kiskiak in the future.
So, you know, when you say the future, I mean, it's been some time now that they've been sitting there. When do you expect them to be moved into a museum?
The museum will be constructed on the property, on the Bluffs property. The plan right now has been submitted for review. That should, by the end of this year, go before the county here for rezoning, which that rezoning, if it passes, would allow us to develop the property and develop the museum for all of the sculptures.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, go ahead.
2025, 2026 at the latest.
And you said that there's some hope that you could restore some of them. Just talk us through which ones, you know, are your favorite of the sculptures.
Well, certainly George Washington and Andrew Jackson next to him with his fine military uniform, his regalia, his epaulets are a standout. Lincoln is
yeah, they're absolutely extraordinary, and hopefully they can be restored and taken and put into a museum. Mark, thank you so much for joining us here on the programme. Okay, well, as you can see, There's so much to discuss around the US election, only 14 days to go. And of course, Mark Austin and I will be leading our coverage from Washington, D.C. We'll also have teams right across the country to bring you all the twists and turns of the election for that night and the week. But of course, we will continue to talk about our coverage and the election in the lead up to. For now, good night.